From the very first moment I met her, I knew she was different. There was a spark in her eyes, a warmth in her smile that made the world seem brighter, as if every ordinary day suddenly held a touch of magic. We were young, full of hope and dreams, and I fell for her without hesitation. Our courtship was a whirlwind of laughter, late-night conversations, and whispered promises. I imagined a lifetime of happiness with her, never questioning that the love we shared could falter. Our early days of marriage were everything I had ever hoped for. Mornings began with soft kisses and shared cups of coffee, while evenings were filled with quiet conversations about our future. Every little gesture, from her playful teasing to the way she held my hand, felt like a reminder that I had found my person, the one I wanted to grow old with. Friends would often say we were made for each other, and in those moments, I wholeheartedly agreed. But life, as it often does, has a way of shifting beneath your feet when you least expect it. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the warmth began to fade. It started with small things, delayed replies to my messages, distracted conversations, the laughter that no longer reached her eyes. At first, I brushed it off, convincing myself that she was busy, tired, or stressed. I told myself these things happen in every marriage. Yet deep down, a small seed of worry began to grow. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had done something wrong or if I had failed her in some invisible way. The home that once felt like a sanctuary now carried a quiet tension that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was subtle, like the slow disappearance of sunlight from a once bright room. And yet, in my heart, I knew something had changed, a shift that would soon challenge everything I believed about love, trust, and the life we had built together. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. At first, it was just a misreply here and there, a brief delay that I brushed off as busyness. I sent her a simple good morning text one Tuesday, and hours later, I got nothing in return. Then came a, "How was your day?" with the same emptiness staring back at me in the form of no response. At first, I tried to be patient, telling myself that everyone gets busy, that she had work or errands or something pressing to occupy her mind. But deep down, I felt an unfamiliar tightness in my chest, a flicker of unease I couldn't quite shake. Days turned into weeks, and the silence grew heavier, almost tangible. I found myself staring at my phone, watching the screen, waiting for her name to light up, only to be met with nothing. My messages became longer, more heartfelt, as if spelling out my emotions in words could somehow bridge the growing distance between us. "I miss you. Are you okay? Please talk to me." Each message felt like sending a message in a bottle into a stormy ocean, with no certainty it would ever reach her. I tried calling her, too, each ring echoing in my chest like a reminder of the space she had created between us. When she finally picked up, her voice was polite, almost detached. "I'm busy," she said, and that was it. No warmth, no explanation, no comfort. Her laughter, which once filled every corner of our home, was gone, replaced by a quiet restraint that felt suffocating. I started to question everything, my actions, my words, even my worth. Had I failed her somehow? Was there something I could have done differently? Nights became the hardest. I would sit alone in the dim glow of the living room, replaying conversations in my head, searching for a clue, a sign, anything that could explain this sudden, unbearable distance. Friends and family offered advice. "Maybe she's just stressed," they said. "Give her space." But space didn't ease the ache. It only amplified it. And then came the realization that shook me to my core. The woman I had loved so deeply, the one I thought would always be by my side, had begun to drift away, silently, quietly, leaving me grappling with growing emptiness I had never known before. The silence wasn't just in her words. It had seeped into our lives, our home, and even into my heart. It was as if the very warmth that defined our love had been replaced by a cold, unspoken distance, a distance I feared might never be bridged. The silence grew unbearable, and I found myself spiraling into a restless desperation. I tried everything I could think of to reach her, to pull her back into the warmth of our shared life. I sent messages at all hours, sweet, pleading, sometimes even frustrated. "Please, just talk to me. Tell me what's wrong. I can't stand this distance." But my words seemed to vanish into a void, unanswered, leaving me hollow and anxious. I began showing up unexpectedly at her workplace, hoping to catch her in a moment of softness, hoping to see a hint of the woman I had once known. But she was always preoccupied, distant, careful not to reveal any cracks in the walls she had built around herself. Each visit ended in awkward silence or polite dismissal, and I returned home each time feeling more invisible than before. Even small gestures of love failed to break through. I bought her favorite flowers, left notes on the kitchen counter, and tried to recreate little moments from the past. A movie we had laughed over, a song that reminded us of our first date. Nothing worked. Her eyes, once so bright and full of life, were now distant, guarded, and cold. It was like trying to hold water in my hands. The tighter I gripped, the more it slipped away. At night, I lay awake, my mind racing through memories, comparing them to the stark reality of today. I remembered the sound of her laughter, the comfort of her hand in mine, the gentle way she used to look at me as if I were the only person in the world. And now, all of that seemed like a dream I had been cruelly forced awake from. Friends and family tried to console me, offering platitudes and advice, but their words felt empty. "Give her space," they said. "Maybe she's going through something." I wanted to believe them, to cling to that hope, but the gnawing emptiness in my chest told me otherwise. I realized that no amount of gifts, messages, or visits could force her to feel what she no longer felt. The desperation turned to fear. Fear of losing her forever. Fear of waking up one day to find that the woman I loved had become a stranger. And yet, even in my despair, a flicker of resolve began to grow. If love alone could not reach her, if my words and gestures were powerless, then perhaps it was time to confront the reality I had been avoiding. I needed to know the truth, even if it hurt more than silence ever could. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights that the truth hit me like a cold wave. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the dark ceiling, trying to make sense of silence that had invaded every corner of our lives. The messages she ignored, the cold politeness in her voice, the way she no longer sought my presence. It all pointed to the same heartbreaking conclusion. She had emotionally checked out. I thought about the signs I had missed, the subtle changes I had brushed aside in the hope that they were temporary. The lack of laughter, the avoidance of touch, the excuses to leave a room or cancel plans. They weren't isolated incidents. They were pieces of a puzzle that finally formed a picture I didn't want to see. She was no longer the woman I had fallen in love with. She had drifted somewhere far away, leaving me alone in a life we had once built together. The realization brought a storm of emotions: sadness, guilt, frustration, and even anger. I asked myself endless questions. Had I failed to notice her unhappiness? Had I not loved her enough? Or had I loved her too much in ways she could no longer recognize? I wanted answers. But deep down I feared that no explanation could change the growing distance between us. I reached out to friends, seeking guidance, but their advice fell hollow. "Maybe she's stressed," they said. "Give her time." Time had already passed, weeks of it, and still she remained unreachable, a silent shadow in our home. It was a painful truth to accept. Love alone could not bridge the gap she created. By dawn, I understood that I had a choice to make. I could cling to a fading illusion, holding on to a love that no longer existed. Or I could face reality with courage and honesty. The thought of divorce was unbearable, yet a part of me knew it might be the only way to preserve my dignity and sanity. It was a painful awakening, but in that moment, clarity emerged. I needed to confront the truth, not with anger, but with acceptance, and prepare myself for a path that neither of us had anticipated, yet one that had quietly been forming long before either of us acknowledged it. The days that followed were heavy with unspoken tension. Every interaction felt like walking on a fragile bridge, afraid that the smallest step might crumble the last remnants of connection between us. I tried to speak to her one evening, sitting across the dining table, my hands trembling slightly as I searched her eyes for a trace of the woman I once knew. "I think we need to talk," I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. She looked up, her gaze distant, almost vacant. "About what?" she replied, as though the question itself was a burden. "About everything." about the silence, the coldness, the emptiness that had grown between us like an uninvited shadow. But I knew that no words, no matter how carefully chosen, could force her to feel what she no longer felt. The realization was crushing, yet undeniable. I could not live in a marriage that existed only in memory, a shell of love that had long since faded. I spent the following nights in quiet reflection, wrestling with my own heart. Divorce was unthinkable at first. The word itself felt like a betrayal, a finality that I wasn't ready to accept. Yet, the more I thought, the clearer it became that it wasn't an act of defeat, but a survival. To stay in a relationship where affection was absent, where intimacy had vanished, would slowly erode the core of who I was. I deserved love, respect, and presence, and so did she in her own way. Finally, I made the painful decision. I contacted a lawyer, and for the first time, I began the formal process of divorce. I did it quietly, deliberately, not out of malice but out of necessity. Each step was a mixture of dread and relief, a strange balance between heartbreak and liberation. On the morning I signed the papers, I felt a heavy weight lift from my shoulders, yet another settled firmly in my chest. Memories of laughter, shared dreams, and whispered promises clung to me, bittersweet and unrelenting. I wonder how she would react, if she even understood the gravity of what had happened. For the first time, I realized that love sometimes ends not because of betrayal or anger, but simply because a bond is quietly unraveled, leaving two people standing apart, searching for a life that no longer exists together. As I placed my signature on the final page, I knew that nothing would ever feel the same again. The decision was made, and the path forward was set, a journey of pain, reflection, and perhaps, eventually, healing. The day I went to the lawyer's office felt heavier than any day I had known. The morning sunlight streamed to the windows, illuminating the sterile, quiet room, but offered no warmth to match the storm inside me. My hands trembled slightly as I held the folder containing the divorce papers, the final proof that a chapter of my life, one I had cherished and protected, was coming to an end. I sat in the leather chair, staring at the blank walls, and tried to steady my thoughts. Memories flooded back uninvited. The way she used to laugh at my jokes, the mornings we spent wrapped in blankets, talking about dreams that now seemed impossibly distant. Each recollection was a mix of sweetness and sorrow, a reminder of what we had lost long before we arrived at this moment. When the lawyer entered, she greeted me with a quiet professionalism that only heightened my anxiety. There were no smiles, no small talk, only the matter-of-fact process of finalizing what had already been decided in my heart. She went over each clause, each stipulation, and I listened mechanically, my mind drifting through scenes of our past, replaying them like an old movie. Then came the moment I had been dreading, the signature. I picked up the pen, feeling its weight almost as if it were heavier than it should be, pressing it against the paper with a mixture of resolve and sorrow. As I wrote my name, a strange calm washed over me, intertwined with aching emptiness. This was it. The finality of it all pressed down like a stone on my chest. Yet underneath that weight, a flicker of relief sparked quietly. Relief at the uncertainty, the relentless waiting, and the endless questions were finally ending. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly, trying to make sense of my swirling emotions. The room felt silent, almost sacred in its quietness, as if acknowledging the significance of this moment. It was a turning point, not just legally, but emotionally, a point where the past was formally closed and a future, uncertain but unbound, lay ahead. And then, as if the universe itself had timed it, the door opened. She was there. Her eyes, wide with shock, reflected disbelief and fear. I had not expected her to come, had not imagined this confrontation. And yet there she stood, the woman who had once been my world, now reduced to a trembling figure before me. She saw the papers, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Her knees buckled slightly, her hand shaking as she reached out to touch the folder. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered my name, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion she had kept hidden for weeks. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I saw her truly, vulnerable, broken, and human. I looked at her, my own heart aching in response. Words failed us both. The papers lay between us, a silent testament to what had been, an emotional distance that had grown too wide to bridge with mere words. That moment, raw and unfiltered, would be etched in my memory forever, a mixture of sorrow, clarity, and the painful beauty of facing a truth that had been inevitable all along. She stood there, frozen for a moment, staring at the papers I had just signed. Her face, usually composed and controlled, now betrayed everything she had been hiding for weeks: confusion, regret, and a sorrow so raw it pierced the air between us. I could see it in the trembling of her hands, the shallow gasp she struggled to contain, and the sudden quiver of her lips that threatened to spill words she could not yet form. Then it happened. Her knees gave way, and she sank to the floor, clutching the folder like a lifeline. She was sobbing, a sound I hadn't heard in years, and it cut through the silence of the office like a blade. For the first time, I saw her vulnerability, the fear and heartbreak she had buried beneath weeks of cold detachment. My heart ached at the sight, a mixture of pain, empathy, and disbelief swirling inside me. "Please, don't do this," she whispered between sobs, her voice barely audible. I can't lose you." I knelt beside her, though unsure whether my presence would comfort or hurt her further. Her tears soaked my sleeve, her body trembling with the weight of emotions she had held back for so long. I wanted to tell her it was too late, that some distances cannot be bridged with apologies, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just sat there, letting her grief unfold, a silent witness to the reality we had created together. In those moments, I realized something profound. She hadn't abandoned me out of malice or hatred. She had been lost in her own fears, in her inability to express feelings she didn't understand herself. She had been afraid of confrontation, of vulnerability, and of acknowledging the fragility of our bond. And yet now, stripped of pretense, all of that came spilling out, unfiltered and undeniable. Her collapse was both heartbreaking and cathartic, a moment where the walls we had built around our hearts crumbled, exposing truths we had ignored for far too long. I could feel the weight of the past weeks lifting, replaced by a somber clarity. The love we had shared had not vanished entirely, but it had changed, altered by misunderstandings, distance, and fear. I helped her sit, our hands brushing, a fleeting connection amid the wreckage of our fractured relationship. There were no words, no promises, only the stark awareness of what had been lost and what could never be regained. In that collapse, we both faced a raw, unfiltered truth. Love, no matter how deep, sometimes falters under the weight of silence and absence, leaving only memories and lessons etched into the heart. The days after the collapse were quiet, almost painfully so. The house felt empty, not just physically, but emotionally. The echo of her sobs and my own unspoken anguish lingered in every corner, a reminder of what had been and what was irretrievably lost. Yet, amid the silence, a strange clarity began to emerge, a clarity that allowed me to see the lessons hidden in the heartbreak. I realized that love, no matter how deep, is not always enough. It cannot thrive on one-sided efforts, nor can it survive when communication fades into silence. We had both loved in our own ways, but fear, pride, and misunderstanding had slowly eroded the bond we once cherished. Accepting that truth was painful, but necessary. I understood that clinging to what was gone would only prolong the suffering and blind me to the possibility of healing. In the quiet moments, I reflected on my own journey. I had learned the importance of self-respect, the courage to face uncomfortable truths, and the necessity of valuing my own emotional well-being. I recognized that letting go was not an act of weakness, but an act of strength, a decision to honor both our lives by acknowledging that sometimes paths must diverge. And yet, despite the pain, I also felt gratitude. Gratitude for the love we had shared, for the laughter, the dreams, and the moments that had once made life feel complete. Those memories, though tinged with sorrow, were treasures I would carry forward, reminders of a chapter that had shaped me, even as it came to an end. I don't know what the future holds, and I don't pretend to, but I do know this. Closure does not mean forgetting, nor does it mean erasing the past. It means understanding, accepting, and allowing oneself to move forward with hope. The road ahead may be uncertain, but it is mine to walk, and I am determined to do so with the lessons of love, loss, and resilience firmly in my heart. In the end, life moves on, and so must we, carrying forward the echoes of what was, while embracing the possibilities of what could be.